Haplogroup I1 formed over approximately 22,900 years and is comprised of over 300 plus phyloequivalent SNPs, meaning that our forefathers over this time period lived in small hunter-gatherer groups. So what is it about 4,600 before present that would change all of that? We now know it was not the introduction of farming into Northern Europe over a millennia prior that would change the hunter-gatherer lifestyle of our forefathers and end this bottleneck. In the 2023 study, Paleogenomics of Upper Paleolithic to Neolithic European hunter-gatherers, our closest pre-I1 ancient DNA connection to date was analyzed. He was labeled OST003 in the study, and he was buried on the small island of Tannenwerder in Lake Osdorf. Lake Osdorf, also known as Osdorfer See in German, is one of many freshwater lakes around the major city of Schwerin, which is located in the very far north of Germany. Mr. OST003 and his forefathers were able to maintain their fisher hunter-gatherer Mesolithic lifestyle despite being surrounded by the funnel beaker farmers. Mr. OST003 had over 90% hunter-gatherer autosomal DNA, the vast majority of which was Western hunter-gatherer autosomal DNA. If we include one read base pair locations on the Y chromosome, he had coverage for 58 out of the 300 plus phyloequivalent SNPs, and he was derived for 53 of them for an I1 SNP rate of 91.4%. If we get rid of the one read base pair locations because they occasionally give off false positives or false negatives, we still have 23 derived SNPs out of 25 for a similar I1 SNP rate of 92%. Now, without having full coverage of all 300 plus SNPs, it's impossible to know for sure when I1's paternal line diverged apart from OST003's paternal line. But if we go off that 92% I1 SNP rate, we would get a date approximately around 6432 before present. So a little over a millennia before Mr. OST003 lived, and a little less than 2 millennia before Mr. I1 lived. This leads me to conclude that similar to Mr. OST003, the forefathers of Mr. I1 have roots in Western hunter-gatherer peoples, and not Scandinavian or Eastern hunter-gatherers. It's also important to note, though, that Lake Osdorf is less than 1 day's walk to the Baltic Sea. So Mr. I1's forefathers could have been living anywhere within that general Western Baltic region, living their fisher hunter-gatherer lifestyle. That includes even Eastern Zealand or Western Scania. In the 2024 study, 100 ancient genomes show repeated population turnovers in Neolithic Denmark. The authors write, "We observe that Danish Mesolithic individuals of the Maglamos, Congomos, and Ertable cultures form a distinct genetic cluster related to other Western European hunter-gatherers. This shared Western hunter-gatherer roots signifies to me that the common ancestor of Mr. OST003 and Mr. I1, living approximately 6,432 years ago, could have been living anywhere in the general Western Baltic region. Due to the lack of ancient DNA samples, any theory regarding I1's paternal line after approximately 6432 before present for the next few millennia is going to be quite speculative. But that being said, I'm going to go over a few possible ideas. One possibility is that when farming was introduced into the Western Baltic around 6,000 years ago, the forefathers of Mr. I1, in order to avoid them, moved into east-central Sweden and mixed with the descendants of Scandinavian hunter-gatherers. Another possibility is that Mr. I1's forefathers living in the Western Baltic maintained their Mesolithic fisher hunter-gatherer lifestyle despite being surrounded by the funnel beaker farmers, similar to the ancestors of Mr. OST 003. In the 2024 study, the authors write, individuals with hunter-gatherer ancestry persisted for decades and perhaps centuries after the arrival of farming groups in Denmark. A few centuries later, the pitted ware culture would make their way to the Western Baltic. To quote the 2024 study, pitted ware culture originated on the Scandinavian peninsula and the Baltic Islands east of the Swedish mainland, but emerged around 5100 to 4700 calibrated before present in the northern and eastern part of Denmark, where it coexisted with the funnel beaker culture. So it's hypothetically possible at this point that Mr. I1's forefathers, who have roots in Western hunter-gatherer ancestry in the Western Baltic, could have started mixing with pitted ware culture individuals who descend from the Scandinavian hunter-gatherers. And his forefathers could have remained in the Western Baltic or even have taken part in maritime expeditions and ended up in eastern Sweden. Around 4,800 years before present, corded ware culture individuals would enter Scandinavia, from the east with the battle axe culture, and from the south with the single grave culture. But notice though, this is still 200 years before the bottleneck ends for I1. So I feel that Mr. I1's forefathers are still living in very small fisher hunter-gatherer groups at this time, whether they're located in the Western Baltic or if they're now in eastern Sweden. In the preprint Steppe Ancestry in Western Eurasia and the Spread of the Germanic Languages, the authors write, by 4600 before present, cultural boundaries emerged separating the Scandinavian peninsula's battle axe culture from the Jutlandic single grave culture, with these showing connections respectively to the east and the south. I find it quite fascinating that the bottleneck for I1 ends only when the battle axe culture has stretched as far west as the southern tip of Scania in Sweden, and the single grave culture has spread as far east as the eastern coastline of Zealand, Denmark. In the 2024 study in regards to the single grave culture, the authors write, a later and slower expansion across the eastern Danish islands starting around 4600 calibrated before present. It's important to note that these two corded ware culture powerhouses had roots in land travel and not in ocean travel. So for them to be separated by this important stretch of water between Zealand and Scania, I can see a scenario arise where they make a treaty with a local fisher hunter-gatherer group along that coastline. And this is what leads to the exchanging of autosomal DNA and the proficiency of Haplogroup I1 and the bottleneck to end. Since the corded ware culture folks initially outnumbered Mr. I1 and his Mesolithic fisher hunter-gatherer people, several centuries later, when we see the Eastern Scandinavians in the archaeological record, they're going to have a majority of steppe autosomal DNA. Mr. OLL009 was analyzed in the 2019 study, The Genomic Ancestry of the Scandinavian Battle Axe Culture People and their Relation to the Broader Corded Ware Horizon. It's very interesting that fully I1 ancient DNA samples don't start showing up in the archaeological record until around 600 years after Mr. I1 is theorized to have lived. And they start showing up when there is increased mobility in the region. The authors of the 2024 study write, the rapid increase in frequency of this haplogroup and associated genome-wide ancestry coincides with increase in human mobility. Being proficient seafarers, perhaps Mr. I1's descendants made their way from the Kattegat to other areas of the Baltic Sea, including northeastern Sweden, where the very proficient downstream descendant, Mr. IDF-29, could have mixed with other corded ware culture peoples and absorbed more of that eastern hunter-gatherer ancestry seen in the East Scandinavian cluster. Thanks for watching.